Most of us think of law as this giant, dusty, old rule book. Super complicated, right? But what if we looked at it in a totally different way? What if law wasn't just a set of facts, but a relationship? Yeah, a story. The story of how two very different kinds of rules got together to create something, well, much, much bigger than themselves. That's the story we're going to tell today, the marriage of law, as seen through the eyes of one of the greatest legal thinkers of the 20th century, H.L.A. Hart.
So let's start where Hart started, with this huge question. What is law, really? Seems simple, but for centuries, philosophers just couldn't quite nail it. Their answers always felt a little off. They could describe what law does, like predicting what a judge will say, but they couldn't explain its essence. They couldn't explain the real difference between a legitimate government and just, well, raw power.
To figure it out, Hart wants us to imagine a really simple, pre-legal society. And in this society, let's meet our first character, a lonely little figure we'll call primary rules. These are the absolute basics, the rules that tell you what you have to do or what you can't do. Don't steal, don't hurt people, keep your promises. Every single society, no matter how simple, has these. They're the bedrock of social life, but on their own, they're not quite enough.
See, a society with only primary rules runs into three big problems. First, it's totally static. If a rule stops making sense, there's no real way to change it. Second, it's super inefficient. If you and I disagree on whether a rule was broken, who settles it? There's no judge, no court. And third, it's just uncertain. There's no official document or person you can point to and say, see, that's the rule. Our lonely character, primary rules, definitely needs a partner.
So who's going to show up to fix all these problems? Well, enter a potential suitor, the theory of John Austin. For Austin, the answer was dead simple. Law is just a command from a sovereign, a powerful ruler who everyone is used to obeying. You do what they say or you get punished. It's a very straightforward, top-down kind of deal. But Hart thought, that's a little too simple and, honestly, a little scary. To show what was wrong with Austin's idea, Hart came up with this brilliant analogy. He asked us to think about a gunman in a bank who yells, "Hand over the money or else." Now, is the law really any different? I mean, in both cases, someone's telling you what to do, and there's a threat if you don't. Is a tax law just a gunman on a much bigger scale? Hart said, no way. There's a fundamental difference, and it all boils down to how we feel about the rule itself.
And this, right here, is Hart's crucial point. The gunman obliges you to hand over your money. You feel forced. You have no choice. But when you get that letter from the tax office, you feel you have an obligation to pay. You might not be happy about it, but you recognize the demand is coming from a legitimate authority. It's that feeling of obligation, not just fear, that makes a legal system work. And Austin's theory just couldn't explain that.
So, if the gunman theory is a bad match, who is the right partner for our primary rules? Well, Hart introduces us to a brand new character, secondary rules. Now, these rules are different. They aren't about what you must or must not do. They're rules about the rules. They tell you how to make new rules, how to change old ones, and how to figure out for sure when a rule has been broken. They are the missing piece of the whole puzzle.
Okay, so we have our two main characters on the stage. We've got primary rules, who impose duties, and we've got secondary rules, who grant powers. Hart is now ready to reveal his great idea. And it's not just that these two types of rules exist, it's all about how they come together.
And here it is. For H.L. Hart, a real grown-up legal system is born from the union of primary and secondary rules. He actually used the word union. It's this marriage, this beautiful combination of duty-imposing rules and power-granting rules that takes us from that simple, pre-legal world into a true legal system. This is the absolute core of his whole theory. And what's so incredibly elegant about this marriage is how it perfectly solves those three problems we talked about. Remember the problem of uncertainty? That gets cured by a rule of recognition, which tells everybody exactly what counts as law. What about the rules being so static? That gets fixed by rules of change, which tell us how laws can be made or updated. And the inefficiency problem? That's solved by rules of adjudication, which give courts the power to settle disputes once and for all.
Let's zoom in on the most important of these secondary rules, the rule of recognition. You can think of it like the marriage certificate for the entire legal system. It is the ultimate test that tells everyone, officials, judges, citizens, what is and what is not a valid law. For instance, in the UK, the rule of recognition is basically whatever the King and Parliament says goes. It's the one foundational rule that everything else is built on.
So we've got the structure of the marriage all set up. But Hart was smart.
He knew that just having these rules on paper wasn't enough. For the whole system to actually work, to be stable, it really matters how people, especially the officials, relate to those rules. It's not just about what they do, it's about what they think.
To get this across, Hart gives us another brilliant distinction: the internal versus the external point of view. Imagine someone with an external point of view, say a Martian who just landed. The Martian can only observe what we do. It sees people stop at red lights and can predict, okay, they'll probably stop at the next one. But the Martian doesn't get the why. Someone with the internal point of view, on the other hand, accepts the rule. They stop at the red light because they see it as a valid standard for how they and everyone else should behave.
And this is absolutely crucial. For a legal system to be healthy, its officials, we're talking judges, lawmakers, police officers, they have to have this internal point of view. They have to accept the rule of recognition as the standard for how they do their jobs. Now, for the rest of us citizens, we just have to generally obey, but it's that internal acceptance by the officials that gives the whole system its legitimacy.
Of course, not everyone was totally sold on this beautiful marriage. And this is where a major critic steps in, one of Hart's own students, actually, a guy named Ronald Dworkin. If we're sticking with our analogy, you can think of Dworkin as the skeptical in-law at the wedding, standing up and saying, wait a minute, this whole union of rules picture is missing something really important.
Dworkin's big argument was that law isn't just a collection of rules. He said that when judges have to decide really tough cases, they don't just look at the rules. They also rely on moral principles and big-picture government policies that are woven into the very fabric of the law. Dworkin believed that even in the trickiest cases, there is always one right answer hiding in that bigger landscape. He felt Hart's model was just too neat, too rigid.
Hart had a pretty practical response to this. He said, look, law has an open texture. Rules aren't always perfectly clear. In new, difficult situations, what he called hard cases, where the rules don't give you a clear answer, well, the rules have basically just run out. At that point, a judge can't just magically discover a pre-existing answer. They have to use their own judgment, their discretion, and essentially create new law to fill in that gap.
What this whole debate really shows is that Hart's idea of the marriage of rules isn't some simple fairy tale that ends with happily ever after. No, it's a complex, living relationship. It's got arguments, it's got challenges, which, if you think about it, is exactly how Hart saw the law itself.
So in the end, what Hart gave us isn't just a rigid definition. It's an incredibly powerful way to understand how law actually works. He shows us that law is a living, breathing system. It's this constant, dynamic balancing act between the primary rules that guide our behavior and the secondary rules that allow the whole system to change and adapt over time. It's a marriage that creates both stability and the power to evolve.
And that leaves us with one last question to chew on. Think about it. When you run into the law in your own life, whether it's paying your taxes, signing a contract, or just stopping at a red light, how does it feel to you? Do you feel like you're staring down the barrel of a gunman's command? Or do you feel like you're part of a union of rules that, for the most part, you accept? Hart's theory really invites us to see that difference.